in London, Ontario, the Minister of Innovation, François-Philippe Champagne, is speaking. Let's listen in.
Because I would say we have been able to attract significant investments, and there's more to come. And today, the PBO released a report, which I welcome, because basically it confirms that the deals that we've made are good deals for Canadians, that they're going to pay dividends for decades to come. And I'll be happy to take your questions so that we can dive into that.
You're a senior minister in government, and according to polls, popularity is very poor right now. What do you think the solution is to that? Does government need to change? I spent the summer meeting with people. Like last weekend, I saw that people were enthusiastic, but there are significant issues that people are dealing with, such as significant economic issues, inflation, cost of groceries. I think the message from Canadians is that we need to focus on their issues, and that's exactly what we'll be doing in the next few days here in London. I think you'll see that the team will come back to Ottawa energized and continue to deliver results. Because one thing Canadians have learned is that when things are not going as well, they need a government that is there for them. And I think they saw that during the pandemic. Will the Prime Minister modify his approach? We're adapting all the time, obviously, in order to respond to the needs of Canadians. I think that the best strategy is the same as in 2015, and that was to focus clearly on the issues that affect people. So when we connect with those issues that affect people, that is exactly how we are able to win over the confidence of Canadians during the most difficult times. I would say that Canadians know deep down that when things are not going as well, they know who they can put their trust in. We saw that as a government during the pandemic when we were there to support Canadians, businesses, workers, and families.
Discrepancy between the 20 years that the PBO says and the 5 years that the Prime Minister had said before. How come there's such a big gap?
Well, it's very simple. If you read the report, the PBO is only considering 8.6% of the economic impact. So obviously that drives the discrepancy. We've always said that what matters is to build the full ecosystem, that not only you have to look at the plant, but the full ecosystem. Not me saying it, but if you read the report, the Parliamentary Budget Officer himself says, I'm only considering 8.6% of the impact. So clearly, if you look at the rest of it, which is the vast majority, you come to a different number. You come to a much shorter payback. But what he confirms is that even in his case, considering less than 10% of the impact, he said those are good deals for Canadians because we're going to get our money within a number of years. And then we're going to reap dividends for, 100 years? Those are the words of the Volkswagen CEO. So my point when I negotiate these arrangements for Canadians is always to make sure that we get more than what we put. And this is assuming, I would say, because as you know, our contribution is deeply conditional. This is assuming that the IRA in the United States will still be in place, because as you know, the contribution of the federal government and provincial governments are subject to the IRA still being in place and not being repealed or modified.
You talked about housing, cost of living, housing, all those kind of issues, saying those are the big issues you want to talk about. Can you explain to Canadians why your government decided to give $28 billion in subsidies to 2 American car companies instead of focusing on housing or other issues?
It's very simple. Well, very simple, because we need to generate revenues. When you're a government, you either tax or you generate revenues. When you make investments, Canadians understand that. They need to invest to generate revenue. And what the PBO said today said, good, you've invested and you're going to get more than what you put. That's basic math that folks at home understand. Because in order to provide the social services and making sure we can build the infrastructure, that we can build Canada of the future, we need to have the revenues. And I think Canadians, my sense, they've told us to see over the last few weeks, is they say, yes, we want to make sure you look at our issues at the end of the month and the end of the week. But at the same time, they want to make sure we build Canada of the future, that their children will be able to take generational opportunity. I always say there's a cost of inaction. Would we be more happy if these plants went to the United States? I think that we're building the infrastructure and the economy of the future.
But Minister,
that's what people expect.
On that, though, doesn't it weaken your argument that it is worth taxpayers' money when instead of it being a payoff in 5 years, it's a payoff in 20 years?
Well, like I said, if you read the report,
it says that you're very optimistic in your projections.
Well, not me, the Trillium Institute, and if you look at these investments across the world, but what I would say is that even the director himself is saying, I'm only considering 8.6% of the impact.
But that's not my question. My question is it still value for Canadians, taxpayers,
100%.
if the payoff is only in 20 years?
Well, listen, because you're considering only 10%, less than 10% of the value. What we said, the value is in the supply chain. The director himself says, by the way, he said, caveat, big caveat, he said it, I'm only looking at less than 10% of the economic value, which drive his number higher. When you look at the full value, which is in the value, is in the supply chain, is in the businesses, just look at the side of Volkswagen. 2/3 of the land is for their sub-suppliers. So he does not look into that. We're looking at the full economic value because that's what mattered to Canadians. And if you look at these plans for 100 years, even if you take his numbers, we would be reaping dividends for 80 years. That's a good deal.
Le directeur parlementaire du budget a qualifié d'illusoire en entrevue votre interprétation du rapport de Trillium.
And the PBO said that
Est-ce que vous êtes toujours aussi
your interpretation of the report
Tout à fait, tout à fait. Tout à fait, parce que nous, on se base sur du réel. Vous savez, c'est pas une analyse qui est théorique, c'est sur du réel.
As you know,
Parce que,
it's not a
regardez
theoretical
l'investissement.
analysis. It's based on real figures.
Il a le droit à son opinion, mais ce que je vous
Well,
dis, nous, c'est sur du
he
réel.
has the
Parce
right
que
to
si vous
his
regardez
opinion.
l'usine de Volkswagen en
But
Espagne,
if we're
par
going to
exemple,
keep the
vous savez que c'est un
Volkswagen
facteur
plant
actuellement
in Spain,
10.
for
Quand
example,
vous avez un investissement comme celui-là, puis vous
we
voyez
have
la
a
preuve,
factor of
vous avez pas
10.
besoin de
So when
prendre
you
de moi,
see
mais
the
regardez les investissements
investment,
qui sont
we
venus la
can
semaine
see. You don't need to
dernière.
hear it
On
from
avait
me.
Volta qui est venu avec Solus. qui est
Volta
venu à
came
Granby.
last week.
On est en train de bâtir tout un écosystème.
And we're building an
De-
entire
Bloomberg disait qu'on a le
ecosystem.
deuxième
Bloomberg
écosystème le
said
plus
that we
important
have
au
the
monde dans les
second
batteries. Donc,
largest
ce qu'on est en train de
battery
bâtir,
ecosystem
c'est
in
de
the world.
saisir des opportunités
So we're seizing these
générationnelles. Puis en même temps,
opportunities,
ce que le directeur parlementaire du budget dit aux
and
Canadiens,
the
ben, écoutez,
PBO
vous allez en avoir pour votre argent.
will
Parce
say
qu'une fois que
you'll
ça va
get
être
your
payé,
money
vous allez avoir des
because
dividendes
once it
dans ce
pays
cas-là
off,
pendant les
there will
décennies
be
à venir.
dividends for decades to come.
This opens you up to criticism that this is about corporate welfare and you don't care about Canadians at a time when a lot of Canadians are under hardship. And you are flailing in the pools. The Liberals are flailing in pools. How do you respond to that? This is not
Well, I
a
would
good look right now.
Well, I would take it slightly differently than you take, because Canadians understand one thing, is that to provide services, either you tax or you generate revenues. Families at home understand that. They say, Minister, keep investing so you generate revenues. What the Parliamentary Budget Officer expressed today is that the investments we make will generate revenues in the coffer. If you look at Volkswagen, the analysis that was done is that over 30 years, you'd have from 200 to 400 billion in economic impact to Canada. That's money that we can reinvest. Canadians expect us to make investments to take bet in the future so that we can be part of the economy of the 21st century. I think this is not only responsible, but I would say, imagine the cost of inaction. Would we celebrate, you and I, today if these plants went south of the border? I think Canadians, when Volkswagen, when you're talking at St. Thomas, you're talking, what, 4,000 jobs? 3,000 to 4,000 jobs, perhaps 30,000 indirect jobs. You're changing the nature of the economy of the country. And I think that was confirmed by the PBO today.
Minister, why do you think Canadians are so angry at your government?
Il y a des députés d'arrière-ban qui se sont tournés vers différents médias pour dire qu'ils étaient frustrés, qu'ils avaient une frustration
Some backbenchers are expressing frustration.
par le premier ministre.
They feel that they're not being heard by the Prime Minister.
Discussion franche.
Ben, j'espère
Will
qu'on
you
va
be
en
having
avoir
discussions
des
on
discussions
that?
franches parce que
And frank discussions? Yes, I
Ben,
hope
moi,
that
je
we
vous
will
dis,
be having
on
frank
doit
discussions.
toujours être à l'écoute de nos collègues.
We always need to be
du
open
caucus parce
to
que c'est
listening to
important,
our
parce que
colleagues in the
le caucus, vous savez,
caucus.
c'est une
It's important
représentation
because, as
des
you know, the
Canadiens et des
caucus is a
Canadiennes dans les différentes
representation
régions
of
du pays. Donc,
Canadians
être à
across the
l'écoute de passer
country.
les prochains jours ensemble, je pense que c'est
So
très
we will
important
be
parce que
here
ça va nous
discussing and
permettre en
listening
équipe de faire
together
le point
as a
et
team
de se
that will
focaliser
allow
sur les
us
enjeux qui comptent
to
pour les Canadiens et les
fine-tune
Canadiennes.
how
Et
we
je
do
vous dirais,
business
en
and
étant
deliver for
moi-même
Canadians.
sur le terrain, en parlant aux gens, ce que les gens nous disent,
Myself,
c'est
out in the
préoccupez-vous
field,
de
talking to
nos
people,
enjeux. Les enjeux qui
they're
comptent pour
telling
les
us
gens, c'est
that we need to focus on their
évidemment le
issues.
coût de la vie, dont le
Obviously, the
coût
cost of
de la
living and
nourriture,
groceries is one of
le
those.
logement. Et finalement,
Housing is
moi, je
another.
pense aussi, les gens disent, ben, continuez d'investir parce que
And I
il faut
also think that
s'assurer aussi
people
que le Canada va être capable
need to
de
understand
prospérer
that
dans le
we need to
21e siècle.
continue
Une rencontre
investing
comme
so
celle-là
that
pendant
Canada
plusieurs jours,
continue
ça nous
to
permet de
prosper in the
se rassembler,
future.
déterminer des priorités à niveau
So
Parlement,
here we will be
frais
able
et
to come
dispo,
together,
justement, pour faire
determine
la bataille
priorities for
que les
Parliament,
Canadiens s'attendent
and
qu'on
get
fasse
ready
pour eux.
for this fight that we will be fighting for Canadians.
Vous n'avez rien annoncé depuis la rencontre du cabinet parce que c'était le même thème il y a quelques semaines. Vous avez dit que
When it comes to
Ben,
housing,
il y a
that
du
was the
travail
same
qui se fait. Je
topic
pense
a
qu'on
few
l'a
weeks
dit
ago.
durant le cabinet.
I think that we
Vous
said
savez,
that during the
l'enjeu du
cabinet
logement,
retreat.
c'est pas un enjeu qui
Cost of
serait
housing is
en
not
claquant
an
des
issue
doigts.
that's
C'est un
going to
enjeu
be
où chacun a une part,
settled
de responsabilité au niveau
overnight.
provincial, municipal. On
And
doit
in
travailler
federal
aussi
legislation, it's
avec,
something that
les
is going to be
différents
played out at the
syndicats.
provincial
On doit travailler
level.
avec l'industrie de la construction parce que
We need to work
c'est un
with the
enjeu
unions
national.
and the
On sait comment
construction
faire parce qu'on l'a vu que dans l'histoire,
industry because
c'est
it
déjà
is a
arrivé, on a
national
besoin de
issue.
faire J'allais dire que se serrer les coudes, de faire un enjeu
I
national,
would say that we need
c'est
to
exactement ça qu'on est en
get
train de parler
down
pour
to
régler
business
cette
and do the
question-là.
hard
Mais
work
tout le
in
monde
order
est
to
conscient à la
resolve
maison
this
que c'est pas un
national
enjeu
issue.
qu'on peut régler,
But as you
dans
know,
l'espace
it's
de
not
quelques
something
semaines.
that can be resolved in just a few weeks.
Why do you think Canadians have so strongly turned against your government in the summer?
Well, I don't have the same reading because you know what? I see people and they tap me in the back and say, keep on going. So maybe my perspective is different than you have because I've met thousands of people over the weekend.
And they're all happy with you guys?
Well, listen, yeah, you should come with me. You'd be surprised, you know.
Really?
Yeah, they are.
So you don't see a problem right now?
Well, I just say that, you know, the perspective that what Canadians, I think, is going on in the country is that there's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of things that people feel in their daily lives. And the one is about their budget, you know, their family budget. They see things are getting more expensive and they're looking for government to help them. And that I understand. I see it all over my neighborhood. I see it in my community. But that being said, they also tell me, you're best placed to have our back because, you know, we saw it during the pandemic. You had our back. You help workers, you help families, you help children. So at the same time, they say there's a lot of things going on, but we trust that you can help us navigate to this time, which is a bit more difficult.
You're talking to all these people, but the polls are saying the complete opposite.
Hey, listen.
Where is the disconnect?
Well, I can tell you, I mean, you're asking, I see the polls, but you know, polls are polls. I tend to deal with people on one-to-one and go. I was in Toronto yesterday. We're in London today. I was in Saint-Tite the weekend. Listen, I meet a lot of folks.
Of course you're saying thank you. We're talking about people who aren't getting
Well,
money,
I was
right?
saying
We're
in
talking about
Saint-Tite,
people
I just had my credit card. I had no cash, so I was not inviting anyone for anything, and they were pretty nice, I was telling you.
What is the estimated break-even time for the EV battery plants in Quebec?
Well, that's a loaded question. I'll have to invite you to the announcement before I can answer that question. No, but I mean, listen, we can talk about the investments that have been made, but future investment, we'll see when these investments come, and I'll be more than happy to tell you the breakdown that you will see with respect to these investments.
Can
But
you give any sort of estimates?
well, which investment are you talking about? I'm happy.
All of the EV battery plants in Quebec, the overall estimate.
Well, I would say there's not yet an EV battery plant in Quebec. So, but there's been other investments that we've been made in the ecosystem, and that's the point I was making to colleagues. That in one way, what we have seen, you know, Volkswagen was a catalyst in the country because once we have attracted Volkswagen, people say if it's good for Volkswagen, it's good for everyone. And by the way, so for folks at home understand, this is deeply conditional. We've not sent any money to Volkswagen. They first have to build a plant of about $9 billion, and if and when they build a plant, and then they start production and they start selling batteries in a retroactive way, we'll look at their sales, and then we'll be providing support, even in the case that the IRA needs to be in place. So what I'm saying is that these, as people has referred to these numbers, people need to understand that this is deeply conditional because there's only going to be production support if the IRA is in place and not repeal or reduce in any fashion. So what I'm saying to Canadians, and it's confirmed in the PBO report, those are good deals for people. Yeah. Maybe the last one because Terry will
All
be
right,
mad
we were
at
just
me.
listening to the Minister of Innovation, François-Philippe Champagne, who is speaking in London, Ontario, where the Liberal caucus is meeting. It comes at a time when the Liberals are trailing behind the Conservatives in the polls. The minister responding to the Parliamentary Budget Officer's new report, which says that it will take 20 years for the federal government to break even on its $28.2 billion investment for EV battery plants in Ontario. Champagne is saying that the PBO is saying that this is a good investment for Canadians that will pay dividends in the years to come. Time for a short break here on CTV News Channel. We'll be right back.